Hi, everybody. This list, Constructive Conversations Guidelines, actually originated in terms of our presentation at Westminster. Our hosts, Steve and Diana, are here from Westminster.
Maybe closer to the mic.
And we found it to be helpful to have this kind of framework so that we can carry on respectful conversations, even in challenging situations. This is in your packet. Hopefully you've had a moment to take a look at this a little bit, but you can look at it offline. The three of us really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Look forward to continuing our ongoing conversation about what's going on in Israel and Gaza and the West Bank and even in the diaspora. I've spoken in the past to the MEPN community about my personal experience. You heard a little bit about it from Janet. What my tagline was, yet even with my background as a Jewish American, I've lived most of my life in a state of incongruence with my tribe. I don't accept what's going on and had a lifelong challenge dealing with this. One of my daughters lives and works in Bethlehem, married to a wonderful Palestinian man, and lives much of the year in Bethlehem with their two kids, our grandkids, and a large extended family and a very close-knit community in Dheisheh refugee camp. Now, we call this event From Palestine to Minnesota, Navigating Difficult Conversations and Taking Actions that Can Change and Save Lives. In the past, when I've spoken for MEPN and for many other events, it's more presentational, and we'll start with a bit of presentation, but we wanted to take this to another stage where people actually have an opportunity to explore how to carry on these difficult conversations, how to approach dealing with it at the current time without being criticized or taken down by what can be very aggressive behavior. So we're here to examine how the language that's being used by our politicians, our media, and out in the community is being used to advance a narrative that favors a Zionist agenda and disadvantages Palestinians. Our words and forms of expression have a significant impact on how we experience and function in the world. So learning more about how that works will hopefully help us to have meaningful conversations with others, even with those with whom we disagree. Now, we're called to act because lives are seriously being impacted every day, and there's tremendous loss. There may or may not be any ceasefire anytime soon, and the cessation of bombing and killing isn't peace, nor what is going on there justice. Now, today I'll begin with a few brief topical interviews. There's some new people, but I just want to make sure that we're all beginning with a common foundation. And then Ariella will come up and propose a format for us to explore these conversations. Now, many of you have likely seen versions of this map illustrating the shocking transformation of the land, looking at the period 1947 to present. Early to mid-20th century, Jewish settlements were present in modest amounts, and for the most part, people lived side by side in reasonable peace and cooperation. When the State of Israel was established, it clearly and dramatically shifted everything on the ground. Huge amounts of land was transferred to the minority Jewish population. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forcibly displaced. Palestinians lost villages, farmlands, their economic infrastructure, their social structure, many being exiled or moved to refugee camps. And as time unfolded, Israel confiscated more and more land, displacing many more Palestinians, systematically destroying their way of life while investing heavily in the growth and resources of their own Jewish population. Now let's pause for a moment to read David Ben-Gurion's statement in 1938. After we become a strong force, as a result of the creation of a state, we shall abolish partition and expand into the whole of Palestine. This was in 1938. We'll come back to this. Now, there are many stories of institutionalized abusive treatment, administrative detention, child detention, forcible transfer of Palestinians off their land, home demolition, separate roads for Palestinians and Jews, abusive checkpoints, different judicial systems and regulations governing Jews and Palestinians, Israeli control over the natural resources, collective punishment. These are common stories in the lives of the Palestinian people. So, what are we supposed to do about all of this? How does this relate to our lives here in the US, here in Minnesota? How do we talk about this with others, especially in situations where there's a significant difference of perspective and concerns? How do the words and language that we use drive the nature of the conversations? And what, if anything, can we all be doing, hoping to make any kind of change happen? Now, we hear a lot of words and phrases, some of which elicit very strong emotional responses and sometimes confrontational and even aggressive reactions. Boycott, divestment, sanctions. And here are some other common words and phrases: antisemitism, Islamophobia, Zionism, anti-Zionism, apartheid, genocide, Hamas, from the river to the sea, Israel has a right to defend itself, and there are many more. Now let's explore the meaning of some of these words and phrases and how they serve or don't serve the people using them, and how they propagate throughout our society to advance various agendas. Hopefully we can gain some insights, advance our understanding, and perhaps develop some approaches and strategies for carrying on relevant and appropriate conversations. So let's start with boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS. Now in 2005, Palestinian civil society organizations called for boycotts, divestment, and sanctions as a form of nonviolent pressure on Israel to establish freedom, justice, and equality for the Palestinians. BDS stands for the principle that Palestinians are entitled to the same rights as the rest of humanity. And inspired by the South African anti-apartheid movement, BDS is having a major impact and is effectively challenging international support for Israeli behavior, policies, and practices. The intent is to get people to boycott companies that work with Israel to oppress the Palestinians, like bulldozer manufacturers, companies that develop surveillance technologies, companies that are benefiting from products created on stolen Palestinian land. They ask for people and organizations to divest from investments that support Israel, like how Minnesota's State Board of Investment invests in companies on behalf of the state pension funds. And they call for national and international legal entities to impose penalties for human rights abuses and by imposing meaningful sanctions. Now, boycotts are constitutionally protected speech, and there have been several successful boycotts throughout US history, and some specifically related to addressing the treatment of the Palestinians. Now, as an indicator of how effective the BDS movement has been, Israeli and US Zionists have created a massive, well-funded campaign to stop BDS and to label it as an anti-Semitic attack on Jews and the state of Israel. As it stands today, 293 anti-boycott laws have been introduced around the country. 235 of them have been passed. And 38 states have this kind of legislation in effect, including here in Minnesota. Yeah, that's pretty astounding. And it's like the same approach, the same language, all developed in all of these states. It's like carbon copies. Now, Minnesota State Board of Investment, the SBI, invests in companies on behalf of the state's pension funds. The Anti-War Committee has identified over $800 million invested by the SBI in entities carrying out or complicit in Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. Calls for divestment have increased significantly since October 7th, and this widespread awareness and activism is clear indication of the success of the movement. Now, applying sanctions is an important mechanism that the United Nations and our international community uses to hold each other accountable. The United States, however, is at the root of the inability to hold Israel accountable, even though they're clearly acting in opposition to international law. Now let's talk a bit about the term apartheid. The Israeli human rights organization Yesh Din and B'Tselem, as well as the Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, have examined the situation in detail, and they've concluded that apartheid is practiced in part of or in the whole of the territory under the effective control of the State of Israel. The Amnesty International report on apartheid is comprehensive, well documented, and painful to read. I highly recommend reading at least the executive summary. It's about 35 pages, and it's a very clear explanation of what apartheid is and how it applies specifically to the situation in Israel and the occupied territories. Using the word apartheid to describe what's happening in Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank, though, can result in very strong responses. And it's a great example of how language can impact the conversations that we have. Using the word genocide is a similar word that elicits very strong responses. So at the root of most of the pushback against trying to establish accountability with respect to Israel is the charge of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a deep-seated, entrenched, multi-millennium global condition. It's real, and it's increasing at an alarming rate. It's absolutely terrifying for the Jewish people, and it should be for everybody, because history shows us that purges don't stop with actions against the Jews. The perpetrators target anybody who challenges them or their dominance. Different races, religions, genders, economic status, even attitudes. And it's unrealistic and in fact dangerous to think that the kind of horrors that existed in the past are gone now, or that it couldn't happen here. We see it in the US now every day, and we're already seeing the expansion of the sentiment to many of those target communities. But it is raising honest concerns about human rights abuses and long-term systemic oppression of the people anti-Semitic? I say no, it is not. And yet, calling somebody anti-Semitic for raising questions and concerns about human rights and treatment of the Palestinians is a strong conversation stopper. Many people won't even talk about this for fear of being cast with that label. This is smokescreen anti-Semitism, using the word as a smokescreen to deflect our focus, to control the conversation, and to stop anything that tries to hold Israel accountable. Sometimes people call this weaponizing anti-Semitism. But branding people as being anti-Semitic for peacefully raising valid concerns about human rights abuses deflects people's attention from very real and serious anti-Semitic behavior, such as what we saw on the t-shirts and tattoos on white supremacists at the DC Capitol on January 6, 2021. I believe that it's important for us all to be aware that all Jews do not speak as a monolith in favor of what Israel is doing. Many people disagree, and the number of people who are taking issues with it has risen by enormous numbers in the last 2 years. It's okay to ask questions. It's important and critical to raise your concerns. Now, I've watched and participated in these conversations for decades. I find it disturbing to see how language is being used, how people use misdirection, lies, anger, and brute force to control the narrative and silence opposition to Israel's behavior, policies, and practices. And our dominant media entities, even our so-called progressive media, are complicit in propagating and continuing false and misleading narratives. We've talked about the language surrounding anti-Semitism, apartheid, and BDS. What other kinds of statements are we hearing? Now, in response to the campus protests and calls to divest, we hear things like, oh, the students don't know the history, they're uninformed. The students are unreasonable and affected by outside agitators. They're preventing people from having their graduation ceremonies. The university leaders are not acting harshly enough against the Palestinian protesting students. And let's not leave out the response to "From the River to the Sea." Yes, this is a chant used by people protesting the situation. For the vast majority of the people protesting, this is a call for freedom, equality, and human rights for the Palestinian people. It's also true that it's a phrase that has been used by Hamas as part of the perspective to not acknowledge the right of the state of Israel to exist. But most of our media only points to Hamas and refuse to acknowledge the call for freedom and equality. And why aren't we hearing about former Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion's statement in 1938 about abolishing partition and expanding into the whole of Palestine? Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's own right-wing Likud party in their 1977 election manifesto states that between the sea and the Jordan, there will only be Israeli sovereignty. Why don't we hear about that? We also hear that problems can't be solved because Israel doesn't have a reliable and trustworthy negotiating partner. Why are we not hearing about Benjamin Netanyahu helping to facilitate the funding that supported the weakening of the Palestinian Authority and supporting Hamas to ensure that there was division among the Palestinians, and that he himself speaks proudly about being responsible for preventing the development of a Palestinian state? Now, these responses have become a recycling drone captured by politicians with their own agendas and propagated by the media. Many of these conversations are quite predictable, and they often don't lead anywhere or change anybody's point of view. The important thing to take from this is that with this language and response, we actually are no longer talking about what Israel is doing to the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank and within the borders of Israel. Now, I've noticed some patterns in these conversations. Complete denial that any of these things are happening. They did this, so we did that. If they stop doing it, maybe we'll consider stopping. The Bible says, followed by selectively using biblical references to affirm their right to be there and do what they're doing. There's often a stream of conveniently framed historical interpretations, only those that support their position and deny anything else. Call upon the memory of the Holocaust. They're doing all of this to protect themselves from another similar atrocity. They shame, demean, and belittle people. You're anti-Semitic. You're a self-hating Jew. Troll people on social media. When all else fails, use shock and anger. October 7th provided a lot of material for this. Some real, some perhaps not. These tactics are actually quite successful in attaining their goals. So now I want to briefly talk about the power dynamic and normalizing oppression. We hear that the situation is complicated. We hear there are different sides to the story. In response to that, I ask, who has the power in the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians? The physical, legal, economic, military, and international power. Who is actually being forcibly displaced from their land? Whose land is being confiscated, followed by repopulation by the people in power? Who controls the natural resources and the freedom of movement and economic activity? Who's actually being discriminated against and persecuted? And who's being arrested and indefinitely detained? Oppression of the Palestinian people has successfully been normalized. We see it and hear about it. We fund it. We even expect it. It's become too easy to throw up our hands in despair and file it away for future consideration. Many people acknowledge that it isn't right. But language, force, and money has been used to firmly establish the decades-long oppression as being the normal state. So where does that leave us? We can acknowledge that these ongoing narratives clearly aren't solving anything. Meanwhile, the dominant power is successful in advancing its long-term goals to take over the entire land from the Jordan's River to the Mediterranean Sea, fulfilling their guiding principle of taking over the most amount of land with the fewest number of Palestinians living on it. The approach is intentional, it's strategic, and it's accelerated now to the point where language used to talk about forcible displacement of all of the Palestinians from the entirety of Gaza and formal annexation of the West Bank is normalized. We need to center our conversations on human rights and behavior of the people involved and on our own sense of humanity. We have to focus our attention on ways to address fundamental problems, root causes, and honest, compassionate solutions. There will never be a sustainable peace and security for the Israeli Jews unless this guides where we go from here. One population should not be allowed to establish the safety, security, well-being, and future for themselves and their children at the expense of another population. For me, this is not debatable. So what we're doing here today is something that we are learning and doing together. It's a practice, and we're here practicing. This is evolving as we go. We're looking forward to your involvement in helping us craft an approach to exploring these conversations together. And now I invite Ariella.
Don't show that yet. Let me just put that Thank you, Ruben. I guess that's a lot to take in, isn't it? Right? So let's just take a moment, and whatever is your way of kind of pausing, settling into your heart and your body a little bit, whether it's through prayer or a few breaths, just want to take a moment or two to bring us back into this moment like what you just heard. If you're ready, I invite you back. Before we break into small groups, because a lot of the bulk of the activities will be in small groups, I just wanted to say a little bit more to build on what Ruben said. We're trying something new this time from Westminster. I continually take workshops. If this was easy, navigating difficult conversations, any kind, if this was easy, it would have been solved years ago, decades ago, right? There's a lot of different approaches, a lot of different techniques. And so this is something I will explain a little bit more about that once when we dive into the actual work. So I invite you to play along as we're all learning different ways that we can show up that is relationally based, values centered, and to have difficult conversations. That make sense? There are some groups that might have 3, it looks like some groups might have 5. It is fine, as long as somewhere between 3 and 5.
And our question is all started with.
Okay, yes, and you all have a topic. So what I just want to talk a little bit about what's different for me, and so we're trying this out, is that I very recently went on a couple trainings on what's called the science of messaging. And it really comes out of a couple people, George Green and Antonia Stanton, who have been working with Democrats across the country to how to not get bought into right-wing narratives and frames and messaging. And so I was really struck by this, and I thought, boy, this might be really good to try out some of these things here while I integrate some of the things that I know, which are called narrative practices and narrative mediation. So this is like I said, we're going to play together. And I did talk to George Green of Connections Lab. He actually lives in Minnesota. And so we talked through some of this. So on your handout here, this one that starts with the science of messaging, reframing challenging conversations. I want to just say that and Ruben actually laid the groundwork beautifully about narratives and language that we use and that we get caught in and that become dominant. So I want to pull out a couple quotes. When people talk to one another, the world gets constructed. The minute you show up and you're in relationship with other people, we are constructing our realities. And the world is made of stories, not atoms. So if we think of that as a metaphor, that we get to co-create our world by the stories we are sharing. And are the stories we're sharing the ones we want to be told and retold? And bell hooks, the engaged voice must never be fixed and absolute, but always changing, always evolving in dialogue with a world beyond itself. That means that we have, when we enter into relationships and conversations, how do we allow ourselves and others to change? You know, how do we stay in relationship and be curious? Am I kind of walking in on bad things here? Sorry. So from the science of messaging, you've got this, it's like we have the power to set the agenda of the conversation. We don't have to buy into what other people are saying. Whoever sets the terms of the conversation, quote, wins, or starts making change. What's being, it's about what's being debated or discussed, the language being used, and the underlying assumptions that don't get questioned. So we get to choose that. And so this isn't about entering into a debate, like, as Ruben even said, it's not like they say something and then we retort back. It's like what's asking us to be in relationship with, but choosing what we choose, framing our conversation and choosing the topic. So it's really about focusing on the conversation that we will benefit from having. Only use language that activate, frames that you want activated. Don't use the dominant language, not even to refute it. You don't want to get into logic and facts and everything else. What the dominant oppressive narratives are about power, whether we're talking about, if I can say this, right-wing politics or what's happening around Israel-Palestine, we don't want to refute it, because the minute we refute it, we are using their terms. We are on their terms, not on ours. So we want to make our case based on our values. Messaging needs to be value-centric, relationally based and value-centric. And we use we repeat the frames and the memes and the messages and the stories to normalize more, good ideas, more progress, more Palestinian liberation and rights. We're going to be practicing some techniques to help us get there. And so we make headway when we can stop, when we reject their terms. We drop their arguments and language and we reframe the conversation using our language and values. That's a tiny bit of introduction. So we've got these three issues, and to be clear, this is what Ruben, Julie, and I decided would be three issues for you to practice with. And again, we all have to unlearn and deconstruct or unpack in order to relearn and co-create together. So a lot of this is learning, to taking a little bit of time to pause and what are we getting trapped in? What is the language and the frames? And Ruben laid the groundwork for that. So these are the three topics, and that's why you're all divided into these three different groups, three different groups. Okay, we can go to the next one. Thanks, Ruben. So you're going to be practicing first on your own, and then with your table mates. You're going to do what George and Antonia call stop, drop, and roll. You're going to be, and you've got a sheet on this, in your packet there, you're going to stop and analyze. What are people saying about your topic? So about your topic. What is the dominant frame or frames? Which dominant moral values are being invoked? So like if it's about, it could be about any of these really, about the Palestinians are subhuman. I mean, there's a value, that's a value being provoked by the dominant narrative. So this is about what is the current dominant narrative or frames, and what are those code words and dog whistles. And so for you to begin to think about, what do we all get trapped in about these dominant ways of talking when it comes to your topic? So like from river to the sea, I think Ruben laid out some great examples of what are some of the taken for granted ways of speaking about it and the power dynamics behind it. Then you're going to drop. You're going to spend a little time about how do you drop, what do you have to drop from that? You want to drop also any facts and logic, because when it comes to changing people's hearts and minds, don't we know that facts and logic don't work, right? Do we agree? I would argue no, they don't. This is what the Republicans are so good at. Remember, this is what propaganda of all kinds is good at. It's about stories. It's about going to whether it's getting to people's fears or getting to people's hopes. So I want you to think about that. The tendency we have is to argue facts and logic. You might be able to include that, but it's not going to change hearts and minds. And we also need to drop the victim, villain, hero story. So the role, can you go to the next one? This is when you're going to practice. So what is your, you're going to roll up like, what do you want? What is you're trying to say? What is your position on the issue? And what do you want done? So for example, even like if you want something done about the starvation, how Israel is starving Gazans, you can talk about that based on a value-based, like human rights, human dignity, whatever it is. And then maybe you want to take action by getting a group of people to send letters, make phone calls to Amy Klobuchar. So that's what you want done. But what your role needs to be, your roll-up is what progressive values are best evoked for this audience. And then, so you're going to practice what this is, okay? So I know this might seem like a lot, but once you get into it. So if you go to in your packet where it says the stop exercise, okay, it says for the issue you've chosen or been assigned, let's take a few minutes to relax. Just relax. So you've been assigned, like it all started on October 7th, from the river to the sea, any criticism of Israel or Zionism means you're anti-Semitic. So what you want to do is begin to try to uncover the language, the narrative frames, and the dominant message, and see what, and just to begin to decide what are those dominant frames and messages that we get caught in. Is this making sense? Sort of. I'm looking at her. This is where you just have to kind of like, we want to, as Ruben laid out, what is the dominant power narratives that get perpetuated on your issue? Like, it all started on October 7th, right? It's like, it was like, that's ahistorical. Right? Did it all start on October 7th?
No.
Right. So how do you begin to name those messages in order for us to change to talk about what we want the conversation to be about? I see a lot of confused looks. What's confusing? Just start, just play with it. This is hard. I'm not going to say that it's easy. But when we want a message of possibility, of human rights, of human dignity, we have to get rid of, we first have to stop where we get caught, because we do not want to use the dominant language. Yes?
Are we supposed to do this part on our own?
Yeah, first start on your own, and then you're going to share within your small group. Oh, right. Oh, sorry. I forgot about an example. Thank you, Ruben. Let me just, okay. So this is an example. Jews have an ancient religious claim to the land. So stop. So we want to stop. God gave the land to the Jews, or the Israelites. The oldest, this is an example of how to stop a dominant message. So, so stopping is the oldest claim is always right and thus dominant. Only Jewish claims to the land have any validity. God was and still is on the side of the Jews and also white Christian Zionists. Agreements between nations don't matter. International and humanitarian laws do not matter. So these are just some of the possible answers to what are those dominant messages around Jews have an ancient religious claim to the land. And then drop. So drop, this is what Jews deserve and have claims on. This is God's will. Thoughts, positions on any religious claim or stance. Righteousness, disregard for international and humanitarian rights. And then roles. So one possibility of an example is, because I believe in human dignity and equality for all, and that people live in ever-changing relationships to one another and context, Jews, Palestinians, Christians, and others are all able to live peacefully and productively on the land. So, do you see where there's that turn? So there's examples there's other examples, not on Israel and Palestine, but there's other examples in this packet. So I just want you to play with it.
I think we're ready.
Well, go ahead and dive in. Take another minute or two around the stop. And then you're going to do the drop exercise. And on the back of the drop exercise, there are some dominant there's a drop references on the back which might help you. So you want to drop reacting. Does anybody do meditation or mindfulness practices? I think a lot of you might. There's a difference between responding versus reacting. We have a choice. We have a choice when we can respond. When we react, we're already we're reacting to what somebody else has done or said. They've got an agenda. We don't. But when we can respond, when we can drop reacting, we get to set the agenda. Drop the dominant words and frames. So like the example here is like, if you want, we're talking about maybe criminal justice reform, you know, the language that's often used is thugs, gang members, you know, or even like around the border, you know, it's like, you know, immigration. So, you know, they're criminals. So we don't want to use that language. And we want to drop facts and logic, not because they're not important, but because they don't work. And consider that there are other messengers, like journalists, who offer this. You know, so, although journalists are getting few and far between. But when it comes to Gaza and the West Bank, there are still people on the ground, despite what's going on. And so that's why it's really important and drop the urge to hit back or debunk. It keeps you in the dominant narrative's frame. It keeps you in their language. It keeps you in their messaging. Translate jargon into plain English. You know, versus like undocumented, it's really about people looking for a better life. Don't take the bait. Be aware. How are those upholding the dominant narrative wanting you to respond so that you stay in their frame and spread their message? Okay, so that's why we do the stop first, and then now spend a few minutes on drop. Whatever your topic is, what might you need to drop? So you're not in their frame. We're not doing their bidding.
I would say, well,
You're excited, I like this.
We're gonna move on to the role exercise. We're moving to the role exercise. Could I have your attention, please? If you turn to your worksheet here. So now that you've had a little experience with identifying some of those dominant frames and language and narratives, and identifying what we need to stop and drop on whatever your topic is, then now it's about what message is beginning to create in your message. So we want to be hyper-focused on values in our message. You know, for the issue you've been assigned, you'll make a message using one or more of the value frames in the values list, and it's on the other side. And you can come up with other values if you prefer. But there's a list of values, core values, as a way to get you started. So what is your issue? So there's an example here using healthcare, but your issue is, in this case, it all started on October 7th. How would we improve the situation with this issue? So there might be something specific. I wouldn't spend too much time on the how for what we're doing today, but it's using the values sheet. See how many of the values connect with your issue. Circle the values you think might work best. So we start from a value-centric place. And then in a sentence or two, use the best values to say why you care about this issue. And why you care about it and how you would begin to assemble the why statement you made. So what you want to do, like here in that example, because I believe in human dignity and equality, or could say human rights for all, and that people live in ever-changing relationships to one another. So if you look at the values page, I think that there's one about interdependence or interconnectivity. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. So I took it interdependence, cooperation, shared prosperity, inherent worth and respect, fundamental rights and human rights, and equality. So I wove those into that statement. Okay?
Where's the statement?
It's only up there. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I guess it's hard to read. So this is there's also an example in your sheet using the issue of healthcare. So down at the bottom it says, you start with the why this matters to you. What are those, why do you care? So in that one up there on the PowerPoint, it's because I believe in human dignity and equality or human rights for all. That is a deep core value of mine. So that's what started my sentence. And then the example here is, I care about people caught in a broken medical system. You are not free if you can't get the care you need. Healthcare must be a right for everyone. Let's fix our broken healthcare system. Yeah, so you've got a couple of examples there. So I'd like you can do this collectively at your table, or you can do it on your own, whatever works best for you at your table. But I'd like you to spend about 10-15 minutes crafting a statement about what is the message you want to be carrying forward on the topic, your topic. And then we'll have a short break, and then we'll come back and share. I want to begin because I want to spend some time as a large group before we spend the last 15 minutes of our time together. So what I'd like to hear First of all, I just want to say, this is just the beginning. As I said, we're all trying to play with this and understand this. This is not easy. I think, as Janet said, we can't solve the whole world's problems in a short afternoon. If this was easy, or if there are clear answers, we wouldn't be here, right? It would have been solved. We wouldn't be having any kind of discussion about how to navigate difficult conversations. So we're all learning. And one thing I think I said at the beginning but did not emphasize, we start with people already in our networks. It could be family members, it could be friends, people within our religious communities. We don't take on the hardcore Zionists. We don't take on the hardcore MAGA folks, the hardcore Christian white Zionists. That's not where all this change happens. It happens at ripple effects. Both in the Talmud and in the Quran, it says if you save one life, it's like saving the world. We have to think of it that way. It's one conversation at a time. So just think about it that way, too. So, what group would like to share your roll-up statement? What did, if you want to share what your topic was, and then just share what you came up with. This, again, isn't about perfection, it's about practice. We're all learning. So who would like to, what group would like to share? And then Julie's got another microphone. Kathy in the back there. Okay, hello?
Not perfection. I'm Kathy Bishop, Illinois Westminster.
You need to speak a lot louder right into the mic.
Hello. I'm Kathy Fisher. I'm a member of Westminster, and I have been interested in this situation since Westminster hosted the 2018 Windows into Palestine. Gotten to know lots of wonderful people in Bethlehem and Janine and all around the area as a result of that. Palestinians, Christians, and Muslims. So, in trying to not copy but use as example the statement that we had in our brochure, I care about people whose land has been usurped illegally, which for me is inherent worth and respect. I care about people whose lives are daily in danger, empathy. I care about people who are denied the essentials of daily living, which is a shared responsibility, and also what was the other, a fundamental and human right.
Thank you so much. So let's hear from a couple more groups, and then I'm going to ask some other questions. What other group? That was great. Thank you. I think that's a wonderful way to begin, and you named all the values that you were playing with. What other group? And then why don't you name the topic you were talking about? I forgot to say that.
So this is very much a rough draft, but our topic was from the river to the sea, and in much of our discussion we wanted to complete the phrase and say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. But the statement that we came up with was very similar to the one there, and then we sort of modified it. So I'll just say it, and know that it would be a little shorter if we had time to edit. So, based on our shared values in human dignity, justice, and equality, and our belief in freedom, justice, and the power of diversity for all, the phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, meets the promise of these values through collective liberation for all.
Beautiful. That's great. Yay. Are people beginning to hear how this works a little bit? Because you're changing. You're asking people, you are setting the tone for the conversation, right? Let's hear from another group. Maybe from one of the different other topics. Oh, let's go ahead, Janice.
We also had From the River to the Sea, and we viewed it as not just Palestinians wanting the river to the sea, but Israelis have pretty much the same moniker. We just came up with a series of statements. Everyone has a right to a home. And home isn't just four walls and a door and a window, it's place. Everyone has a right to care for their families in peace. Everyone has a right to medical care. Everyone has a right to freedom from violence. Everyone has a right to protect and raise their children.
That's great, thank you. Well done. This is great. Let's give everybody, okay, where are all the applause? Okay, come on, Rebecca. Let's hear from one of the other, a group from one of the other topics. If you're willing to just give it a try. Again, this is just practice.
I'll try.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. This is also, you know what, there's something called courageous conversations, and sometimes we have to enter into discomfort.
We did not get anywhere near coming to a statement, and we didn't even get to the drop. So what we ended up doing at the end, I think, is, so we had the belief that any criticism of Israel or Zionism is anti-Semitic. So I think one of the things we came up with is that it's very important to expose everybody to specific Palestinian stories and experiences, such as no other land has the potential, still has the potential, to make a big impact on people who aren't already invested in the issue or know nothing about it. And that is also, with that aim, is to get the press, all sorts of press, to cover Palestinian stories from Palestinian points of view by Palestinian reporters, and to have much more public discussion, again, to get people to also, we were talking about, sorry, it's not a concise statement, but looking at the incredible curtailment of free speech by students on campuses and demonizing, even criminalizing any speaking out in terms of Palestine, is that we need to use our money and our voice. So if we went to any university we went to, either give them money saying, I'm doing this because you're standing up, or saying, I will never give you money as long as you capitulate and follow this. And any organization, as constituents, write and talk to all of our representatives saying, I'm not going to vote for you unless you do this or consider this. That's it.
What's your name again?
Cassian. Oh, sorry, Cassian.
Cassian, thank you. So Cassian, with that, are you willing to play with me a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, so if you go to the core values statement, so if, based on what you said, there's so much embedded in what you said that I think we can play with. So what, and you could choose all or one. Which of these values might you use in creating a statement?
We did also think very specifically about talking to maybe MAGA people more. And we thought that they would more, especially, I'm sorry I don't remember your name, but especially believe in the question of fairness, responsibility, especially, freedom, just because these are catchphrases, not necessarily ideas, really, that these people say they believe in. So I think really we thought responsibility, fundamental rights and human rights, equality, fairness, and freedom. We thought diversity wouldn't go anywhere.
Right.
And solidarity won't go anywhere with these people, so that was kind of the empathy also probably not.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way. So one of the things that I didn't mention that we usually need to, most people can hold, believe it or not, more than one viewpoint, but we need to find the shared viewpoint or shared value. And you did a beautiful job in talking about that. And so let's again play a little bit more.
Yeah, I want to say this is not me, this is all our...
I know, it's your whole group, and you're the spokesperson, and so thank you for that. And this could be your whole group chiming in. So based on all or some of those values you identified and what you want to see, let's just like collectively create a statement that you might be able to take to journalists, to send a letter to the editor maybe, or something like that to call out, but you're calling in. There's a whole thing about calling in people versus calling them out. But call in journalists perhaps to expose a little bit more about the, and I'm going to take the non-value statement here, but exposing the eroding of our constitutional rights, for protesting and the criminalization of that. I can't remember everything you said, but also just showing more of the Palestinian stories and lived experiences. How could you call, using some of these values, start naming that and uplifting, this is what you want to see, this is what you believe will be important, is important. Just kind of, let's just co-create something in the moment.
Does anybody else from our group want to chime in?
Go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Not our group, doesn't matter.
Yeah, same topic. So any criticism of Israel, Zionism is anti-Semitic. And the conclusion that we came to is that anti-Semitism is real and that Jews do need to be protected. And it's because of that that we want this to be resolved, because this is creating anti-Semitism. So that was really the conversation that we were having here, that this is not serving the Jews. So we just trying to create a different future for both populations. And one of the guys in our group was talking with Jacob Fry, the mayor of Minneapolis, and just really calling him out on things. And Jacob Fry told him that he was anti-Semitic, and that was the end of the conversation.
Okay.
Right.
Good to know.
And that's a good, off mic I can talk about. But I think that's a great example. And sometimes when that happens, we just think, there's no point in going further in a situation like that. There could be something where writing a letter to the editor, using this kind of framework that we're playing with, gives you time to respond, gives you time to have a value-stated statement.
So with a conversation stopper, like
Right.
the statement is, that's the conversation stopper.
Right.
To say back to the person, could you tell me some more about your feelings about this?
Perfect. Or how did you come to this idea? So another thing to do, I think you raised a great question, how do we stay curious? How do we, especially with people we know, or even with an elected official, how do we stay in relationship and how do we stay curious and say, oh, what brought you to this idea? Tell me more. And are you open to hearing another viewpoint? How do we come to some shared understanding and agreement? So I think you raise a great point. Are there other people that want to share? Anybody who had it all started on October 7th? Anybody want to share? Again, as you can see, this isn't about coming up with a perfect statement or ideas. Anybody want to play and be a little courageous and be a little uncomfortable, because having difficult conversations requires us to be in discomfort. And you don't have to, but I just wanted to give an invitation.
I would just wanted to say our group had a very hard time. We want to teach people, and about what really happened and the history, and it was hard to get past that.
I'm glad you said that, because it is. This is about unlearning how we're being. There's a whole communication, not to get conceptual there, but I will for a moment. There's a whole theory of communicating called positioning theory, where people will call us into the position that they want us in. So Ruben talked about power and the power of certain narratives. They're calling us into a position. They're calling us into a position where we want to refute, we want to teach, We want to try to use reason and logic and history. I was a history major, believe me, I believe in history. But who gets to tell the story, right? That's a whole other thing. But we are then being called into a position on their terms. And that's why it doesn't work. This whole process is based on research about how to move people. And that's why it's connecting on a human level, it's connecting on a values level. So it's not about teaching, and we do all have that tendency, I think we all do. But how do we move it? I think to recognize that that's where it starts, to recognize that's our tendency, to recognize they want us to take the bait and try to teach. And so how do we begin to at least recognize and stop that? That's a great beginning. And then we can backtrack. We have to say, well, what is our value here, and what do we really want to say? How do we center the conversation based on values? Yes.
I think we all have that tendency to want to, share the facts. But what was, the example that we have was the marriage amendment.
Bingo.
And how that, that took a huge turn by sharing stories, sharing love stories.
Bingo. That is a great example of what happens, and that's about, I'm blinking out on exactly what it's called, but it's about staying in relationship. It's about relating and sharing a story and asking questions. What does marriage and love mean to you? Let me tell you what it means to me. And that's where the idea of, do you know any Palestinians? Have you ever heard a Palestinian's viewpoint and lived experience? Have you seen a film, whether it's No Other Land, whether it's Boycott? There's Gaza from 2014, and it's like, so there's ways to do that, but it's based on your values and staying in relationship. So thank you for bringing that up. We'll take this as the last one, and then we're going to close this off.
Can you give an example for the group with October 7th? How would you do that without facts? Because every time I try to answer it, I come back with, well, this and this, and it's all facts.
That is a tough one. So Ruben, help me out here.
Well, yes.
Go ahead.
We're dancing very close to facts, but I just asked the question to the person I'm in dialogue with, how did Hamas come to power? And then say, well, there's a historical analogy to some of this. How do you feel about what happened in the Soviet Union? In Russia, when Putin and Navalny, so Putin has Navalny arrested, and so he can't run against Putin. Hamas, all the Palestinian leaders were put in jail, and Hamas is the only one left. And so to use some of the parallels, but using Nelson Mandela in South Africa or others.
I think, and I hear it is dancing with the facts. So I think if you look at the value sheet again, what values might you use to begin to challenge that narrative? I'm just curious, what values?
So when I looked at all of these, tried to fit it with this, the one that really speaks to me is every person matters and deserves dignity.
Mm-hmm.
That is the one that speaks to me the loudest, the biggest out of all of those. That's the one that I would use. And I like that so much. I wish there were other ones, but I want to sit with that and see where it can go with that. That's where I would start.
That's great. What other values might you build on with that or use in conjunction when it comes to, it all started October 7th? Any other thoughts? Equality. What about that, interdependence?
What about injustice?
Well, then, but you want the value of justice rather than the what about freedom?
I think fairness and freedom when we know who we're talking to, because
Right.
those people will never say they don't like fairness and freedom.
Right.
They may not
Right.
believe in
Right.
equality or diversity,
Right.
but
And the reason I would look at something like interdependence, it's because history did not start on October 7th. So there was a lot of interdependence that led up to October 7th. So that could be one way to look at it. Ruben, do you have some thoughts about this one?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was just, we actually added here was value
That's great.
of nonviolence. Violence begets violence.
Yes. I think that is awesome. As I said, this was just the beginning to get you started. Go ahead.
Oh, I like that. and
So do I. Yeah.
I was going around here having this conversation.
Use the microphone.
No, just closer.
Hello?
Yeah, yeah.
We were having that conversation, and I said the same thing you did. History did not begin on October 7th.
Right.
And what I added was that I don't know anybody who thinks that if Hamas disbanded today and gave up all the hostages, that Israel would stop.
Exactly.
They're not going to stop. I mean, we saw from the 1938 statement of David Ben Gurion. You know, that it's all part of a narrative that we don't want to buy into. And so the key thing is, how do we focus the conversation on something that isn't falling into the sort of linear data sharing? I did this, they did that, somebody else did something else, and so then it ends up being, again, on their terms.
Right. They're calling us into a position. So I just want to check time though. We got some, looks like we got some questions. And I'm looking at you though, because the two of you have the last part. So how much time do you want? Well, talking about time. Yeah, so.
I can go through what I want to do pretty quickly.
yeah, we can't hear you.
No, he's not holding it. Yeah.
I can do what I need to pretty quickly.
Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna give Julie, why don't you go over there? I saw whose hands were up, I'm so sorry. So we'll take a couple more comments or questions.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. My comment is that for 2,000 years after the diaspora, Jews were marginalized, raped, killed, kept to the minimum of living standards. And I understand that they wanted a place to live, that they were free, but that does not give them the right to trample on other people's rights.
Right, and then, go ahead, I'm so sorry. Okay, I think your ideas are good. How do you center that into values? So because, so when you're having a conversation, how do you, so I would even say as somebody who's Jewish, how do I acknowledge that in terms of, as Ruben even said, anti-Semitism is real. And it has been going on for well over 2,000 years. And Jews continue to be re-traumatized because of their intergenerational and historical trauma. How do we begin to separate that from the values in terms of understanding from an interdependent perspective how I'm looking at October 7th here. So it's not much about the anti-Semitism, so I'm kind of conflating the two. But it's, so if you're talking about the anti-Semitism or the weaponizing anti-Semitism, I like where you're going, where it's acknowledging the reality of anti-Semitism. Let me start there. And say, this has happened. And Jews have carried historical and intergenerational trauma. At the same time, the state of Israel is separate from being Jewish. And yet I recognize some interdependency there, and yet I'm wondering where is there equality, nonviolence, Where is there fairness and human dignity and human rights for all? While we hold the reality of anti-Semitism, while we seek dignity and human rights for all. So there could be something along those lines, and I'm just doing this on the fly. One more comment, and then I think we need to, yes.
The other, I'm not Jewish, but the other thing is my great understanding of what Judaism means and the core value is justice. Justice for everyone, and historically, if you look at South Africa, all the great fighters were white, were Jewish almost, to a person. But the point is that that's a strong tradition, and that's at the core of Judaism. So if you're talking about the importance and the experience of Judaism, I'd go to that too.
That's a great point. That's awesome. Okay, okay, you can have the last word.
On this point, I just think it's inescapable that no one would say that Netanyahu is a great example of a Jewish practicing person, right? I used to be Jewish, but I don't see any of the values that you describe as Judaism in his behavior or his belief. But his assertion that everything that Israel does is representative and must be supported by all Jews, I actually find it as anti-Semitic.
There's a lot of us Jews who feel that way, but when you're talking to somebody, how do you talk about that? How do you question that from a value statement? So rather than questioning, because that right away you're taking the bait with that, by saying that. And I believe me, I'm with you, and yet how do we not get caught in that tit for tat? That's what we're trying to practice. So I just want to thank you for playing. I know, as I said at the beginning, this is not easy. We are unlearning. We first have to pay attention and be aware, unlearn, and it's an ongoing practice. And then we have to remember, continually practice to how do we change the position we are being called into from a values position, so we can begin to have more, I don't want to say more healing and healthy conversations. So thank you for playing. I know it's hard, but I think you are all getting there. I mean, again, this is going to take forever. The last page, I just want to point out, if you really want to learn more about this, and this is, again, based on more working with Democrats and how to change their narratives to not to be caught in the Republican, the current Republican regime. It's George Green, who lives in Minnesota, this Connections Lab, and then there's Antonia Stanton, who writes this incredible Substack called Reframing America. So you might be interested, Connections Lab, there's a whole bunch of resources there. So thank you for trying this out with me.
Thanks, Ariella.
Can I add to that, Marshall Rosenberg, nonviolent?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of different approaches for this. That's a little different because I was trained in that a long time ago, and it's also very valuable. Do any of you know Mel Duncan? Okay. Well, I can share with you a little later about that, but yeah.
Okay, so thanks, Ariella, and thank you all for working on this.
Into the microphone.
So I think the key thing that you can walk away from this is not feeling, oh, this is cumbersome or this is hard. It's how do I reframe my response to other people's comments? And how do I frame a response in the values that I have? And as I said earlier, it's okay to disagree, it's okay to ask questions, but what can we do beyond talk? And so first, let's not minimize the value of talking. Getting these ideas out into the public discourse has had an enormous impact in the last few years, especially since October 7th, and it's definitely making a difference. Also, I just want to share a thought about what I call micro exchanges. When somebody says something that you disagree with, you don't have to engage people deeply in a conversation. It's enough to maybe just say, I really disagree with what you're saying. You don't have to explain anything, but just the idea that you're getting out that there's another point of view, and you're willing to refute that person's comment by just disagreeing with it. You can decide if you want to dig deeper into a conversation. You can decide how you want to do it. And it could be a simple exchange about values. What are the values that you have that are, perhaps a response to that? But I think in this time, it's important that we say something rather than nothing. The tendency is to shut down. I experienced that myself. I mean, it's somewhere between hitting somebody in the head and shutting down. I think the key is don't shut down. You're okay to say what you think, and I think keeping it short and simple can have a huge impact. That person maybe the next time may be a little more careful what they say or how they say it, or just even know that they're not going to be left untouched if they say something that is really questionable.
Ruben, can I just say something to that? Thank you. We don't know the impact of the conversations we have. It could be months or years later when somebody comes back to you saying, oh, well, you told me you disagreed and why you disagreed, or for a value statement that I'm not going to engage with you. They may have gone away thinking about that and doing their own research or whatever. We don't know in the moment if we've made a difference, and we have to trust that and have some faith.
Yes, thank you. So that's important. Now, Ariella, Julie, and I have compiled a set of documents that are in your packet to take with you and to help guide any advocacy activities that you decide to pursue. And we have some topic background and talking point documents, some sample scripts to assist you in any engagements you may have with legislators. So, for example, we're currently trying to repeal Minnesota's anti-boycott legislation. We have a chance of making a difference on this. There's a bill introduced in both the Senate and the House, and this is going to come up in this legislative session. Our legislators need to hear that we want this thing repealed. And you can focus on the free speech issues in communications with your legislators. A boycott is a protected constitutional right. Whether you like it or not, we're not asking you to change your opinion, but we're asking you to repeal a bill that prevents us from expressing ours.
Ruben, may I say something about that?
Thank you, Ruben. We have green cards here for you to fill out today. We will mail them. There's a little box. If you did get a green card, I'll walk around and pass them out. And it's to send a card to your representative to express your feelings on this issue. Thank you.
We have a draft letter that we're asking our legislators to sign and send to Attorney General Ellison, asking him to actually write a legal opinion about the constitutionality of the anti-boycott legislation. We're convinced that it's actually unconstitutional. He won't do anything unless a legislator asks him to write that opinion. So we're asking people to contact A.G. Ellison. And there are information sheets here so that you can look things up. Some information about divestment and the Israeli bonds, for example. We're trying to get the State Board of Investment to not renew. There's an anti-Semitism definition legislation that we're very concerned is going to come forward in Minnesota. Why should we have this? I can't explain that other than it's part of the campaign, like the anti-boycott legislation, to stop any kind of accountability for Israel. Well, there's a Jewish Community Action statement about this. There's a definition that has been put out by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance that really claims that any attempt to hold Israel accountable is anti-Semitic. So it just shuts down the conversation. We're pointing people, if they have to do something, to the Jerusalem Declaration on Antisemitism, which is a bit better than the IHRA version. So there's information in here. And then we're asking you to take a look at the commit to action. Just something in there that rises up for you, say, I agree with this, I can do something with this, or I know my legislator, I'm going to see them next week at a town hall meeting, I can ask about this or say something. We're just asking people to look at that and commit to something. And then there's a resource document for you to continue to do your own research and learn more about what's happening.
On that thing of resources, information resources, put Al Jazeera English and electronic intifada.
Yes, sure. This is not complete. I mean, this is just some stuff to help people do their own research, and that's one of the things that we're actually asking you all to do. Do your research. When people are saying things, when politicians or the media are saying things, have this little alert in your head saying, well, gee, I don't know, is this just another one of those dominant narratives, or should I be questioning this? And then start looking to try to find from some respected sources, what matters to you. And so going away from this, hopefully is not saying, oh, gee, this was really cumbersome, it was hard to do, it was not clear. Hopefully, you're getting a much more clear picture about how the dominant narrative controls our conversations and how we can use our values and our perspectives on these things to respond to those situations. So.